Elvis Presley reunites with the midwife who helped his mother, and what he does makes her cry. There's something about going back to where it all began. For Elvis Presley, it wasn't the lights of Vegas or the gates of Graceland that stirred his soul. It was a quiet return to the dusty streets of Tupelo, Mississippi. No press, no entourage, just Elvis, and a longing he couldn't quite explain. He hadn't been back in years. Not really. Sure, he'd done the occasional public appearance and donated to the local church. But this was different. It was personal. The kind of visit you make when something inside you is unsettled. When the noise of fame gets so loud, you start to forget the sound of your own thoughts. Elvis walked alone down the narrow path behind his old childhood home. The ground was dry, cracked in places, just like he remembered. As he passed the weathered porch where Gladys used to sit and sing hymns in the evenings, memories came rushing in, some sweet, others haunting. He paused at the corner store, now run by a gray-haired woman with kind eyes. She recognized him immediately, though she said nothing at first. Just smiled and handed him a glass bottle of soda like it was 1945 again. "You know," she said gently, "your mama used to come in here with you swaddled tight against her chest. Always said that Midwife was touched by God." She said it so casually, so matter-of-fact, that Elvis almost missed it. He turned back. "What did you say?" The woman smiled again, slower this time. "The midwife, the one who helped bring you into the world. Gladys used to say she had God in her hands." Elvis blinked. His mama had told him 1,000 stories, about his childhood, their poverty, the church choir, but he'd never heard about a midwife. Not once. He took another sip of soda and nodded, but his mind was already elsewhere. A midwife, God in her hands. Why had Gladys never told him? Or had she, and he'd just never really listened? Later that night, back in the small motel he'd checked into under a fake name, Elvis couldn't sleep. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the ceiling fans spinning slowly above him. That old woman's words echoed in his head like a broken record. Touched by God. And for the first time in a long time, Elvis didn't feel like the king. He felt like a man chasing a thread in the dark, trying to pull together the pieces of a life he'd only half understood. Why was this bothering him so much? Maybe it was the weight of everything he'd been through, the loneliness that came with fame, the health scares, the sense that he was more myth than man now. Or maybe it was just that he missed his mama more than he cared to admit. Whatever the reason, something in him had cracked open. He needed to know who that woman was. The one who helped Gladys when she was scared and alone, bringing life into a tiny, unheated shack with nothing but courage and skill. He couldn't explain it, but he felt like he owed her something, maybe even everything. The next morning, Elvis drove back to the store. The woman was there again, sweeping the porch with a straw broom. "You remember that midwife's name?" he asked softly. She looked up, surprised. Martha, I think. Martha Louise something. It's been a long time, honey." Elvis nodded again, thanking her, then got back into his car, his heart beating faster than it had in weeks. It wasn't much to go on, but it was a start. And just like that, a simple trip home turned into something else entirely. Elvis drove back to Memphis that same day, but something inside him had shifted. The road hummed beneath the tires, the miles blurring into each other, but his mind stayed rooted in one place. Tupelo. And in that one name that had floated up like a whisper from the past, Martha Louise. He didn't go home to Graceland right away. Instead, he pulled into his Aunt Delta's place. She'd always been the keeper of Presley family memories, the one with the photo albums and the old stories. If anyone knew the truth, it was her. Delta opened the door with a puzzled smile. "Well, look who the cat dragged in." They sat in her kitchen, the air thick with the smell of fried chicken and old wood. Elvis got straight to the point. "Aunt Delta, did Mama ever mention a midwife? Someone who helped deliver me?" Delta's brow furrowed. She looked down at her hands, then back up at him. "Well, she didn't talk about that day much. It scared her half to death." Elvis leaned in. "What do you mean?" Delta sighed. "Your birth. It was rough. Real rough. Gladys wasn't well. You came early, and for a minute there, they thought you weren't going to make it. But that midwife, yes, I remember now. Martha Louise Green. She wasn't just a nurse. She was more like a healer. She came from down near Verona. Didn't have much schooling, but people trusted her. That name, Martha Louise Green, it landed like a stone in Elvis's chest. "She was there that night?" he asked. Delta nodded. "Yeah. Gladys always said she saved your life. You stopped breathing. Twice, I think. Martha wouldn't give up." Elvis stared at the table, trying to imagine it. The tiny house, the fear in his mother's eyes, the midwife working with nothing but faith and her bare hands. He felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Raw gratitude, not just for his fame or his success, but for the simple fact that he was alive. "I never knew," he whispered. "Your mama didn't want you to carry that weight," Delta said. "She said what mattered was that you lived." But now Elvis did know, and the weight of that knowledge felt sacred. Over the next few days, he made quiet calls, discreet ones. He didn't want this turning into a media circus. He had one of his most trusted aides, Bobby, look into records from old clinics, midwife logs, church registries, anything that might lead to Martha Louise Green. It wasn't easy. Most of the rural records were gone or buried under decades of dust. But Bobby found a few pieces. A midwife license from the 1930s, a church bulletin with her name on it, and finally a long shot. A woman who'd once been delivered by Martha herself. That woman, named Edna Ray, was 62 and living in Tupelo. When Bobby asked if she remembered Martha, she lit up. "Oh Lord, yes," she'd said. "Martha delivered half the babies around here back then. Lived out near the old peach orchard. Kind woman. Strong hands. Never took a dime from families who couldn't pay." And then came the kicker. "She's still alive?" Bobby paused. "We think so. You know where she might be?" Edna nodded. "Last I heard, she moved out to a little place near Pontotoc. Lives quiet. Doesn't like attention." That was all Elvis needed. He didn't say anything to the press. Not even to his closest friends. He kept the mission to himself. Not because he was ashamed, but because it felt private, sacred. In the quiet hours before dawn, Elvis would sit at the piano and play soft, half-formed melodies. Nothing recorded, nothing rehearsed. Just thoughts turned into sound. He wondered what Martha might look like now. Did she even remember that night? Would she believe it was really him, all grown up? And then, there was the bigger question. Why did this matter so much to him? Elvis had met presidents, movie stars, world leaders. He'd signed autographs for kids and held hands with strangers. But something about this woman, the woman who saw him before he took his first breath, felt different. She wasn't just part of his history. She was the beginning of it. He couldn't shake the thought. What if she hadn't been there? What if she had given up? And what if no one had ever thanked her? It gnawed at him. All his life, people had showered him with praise. But the person who might have deserved it most had been living in quiet obscurity. He thought of Gladys, how much she had suffered, how fiercely she'd loved him. And suddenly, this wasn't just about Martha. It was about honoring his mother. The drive to Pontotoc was quiet. Elvis took the back roads, windows down, letting the wind carry some of the nerves away. Even though he'd performed in front of millions, this was different. He wasn't about to meet a fan or a reporter. He was about to meet the woman who, according to everything he'd learned, had saved his life before it even began. Martha Louise Green lived in a small white cottage surrounded by wildflowers and silence. There was no fence, no sign, just a gravel path leading up to a porch with a rocking chair that looked older than he was. Elvis pulled up slow, heart thudding like he was backstage again at the Louisiana hayride. He didn't bring a bodyguard, not even Bobby. This wasn't a moment he wanted filtered through someone else's eyes. On the porch, an elderly woman was trimming lavender, her gray hair braided down her back. Her hands were steady, patient, the kind of hands that had seen decades of life and still moved with purpose. He stepped out of the car. "Ma'am?" he said gently. She looked up, squinting into the sun. "Can I help you, son?" Elvis removed his sunglasses. "Are you Martha Louise Green?" "I am," she said slowly, taking in his face. "My name's Elvis Presley," he said, voice trembling slightly. I think you might have helped my mama one cold night back in 1935. Her expression didn't change at first. She just stared at him, searching his eyes like they were a puzzle she hadn't seen in decades. Then her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my Lord," she whispered. "The little baby that wouldn't breathe." Elvis nodded. "Yes, ma'am." She took a step forward, tears welling up behind her glasses. You were so tiny, blue as a robin's egg. I remember holding you in my hands and praying you'd take just one breath. Just one. You didn't give up," he said softly. "No," she said. "I couldn't." Something in me said, "Keep going." And then, you cried. Loudest little thing I ever heard. They stood there in silence for a moment, the Mississippi breeze passing between them like a blessing. Then she motioned to the porch. "Sit a spell. I haven't got sweet tea, but I've got stories." They sat together, and for the next hour, Martha told him everything she remembered. She spoke of how Gladys had cried through the night, gripping her hand with a fear no words could touch, of how the shack they lived in had no heat, how the doctor left after delivering the stillborn twin, thinking the other boy wouldn't make it either. "But your mama, she wouldn't let go." "And neither would I," Martha said. "Sometimes a life just needs a little more time to decide." Elvis listened, tears sliding silently down his cheeks. It felt like listening to a bedtime story he should have heard as a child, but didn't get until now. When she finished, he reached for her hand. "Miss Martha, I don't know how to thank you. I've lived this big, loud life, but if it wasn't for you, none of it would have happened." She smiled, her hand still steady in his. "Oh, honey, the thanks is getting to see the man you became. That's more than enough for me." But Elvis had something more in mind. Elvis didn't say much as he drove back to Memphis that evening. The radio was off. The windows were up. His thoughts for once weren't racing. They were still, anchored. Meeting Martha had done something to him. It quieted a part of his soul that had been restless for years. Fame could put a man in a million rooms and still leave him feeling like he belonged nowhere. But that porch, that story, those weathered hands, that was real. That was home. And home deserved more than words. A few nights later, he sat at the piano in Graceland, just him and the keys. He let his fingers wander, not with the flash of a concert, but the slow reverence of memory. He didn't try to write a hit. He wasn't thinking about charts or tours. He was thinking about a woman who refused to stop trying, who waited on a cry, who gave his mother hope when there was none. And from that space, the melody came, gentle, healing, like a lullaby whispered to the stars. The lyrics followed. "When the room was still, and the breath was gone, you stayed beside me, holding on. Through trembling hands and silent fears, you gave me life. And all these years." He called it the waiting hands. Elvis didn't tell many people what he was planning next. He wanted it to be personal, intimate, just like that porch. A few weeks later, he returned to Pontotoc. But this time, he didn't come alone. Behind him was a caravan of quiet helpers. His band, a few sound techs, and a small crew to capture the moment, not for publicity, for preservation. Elvis wanted it on film, not to show the world what he did, but to honor what she had done. They set up in the field behind Martha's home, just a small wooden platform, a few folding chairs, and the wide open sky. No crowd, no ticket sale, just neighbors, friends, and a few of Martha's former patients he'd tracked down and flown in. Martha sat in the front row, her Sunday dress pressed and her white hair pinned up with care. She kept shaking her head like she couldn't believe any of it was real. Elvis walked onto that tiny stage in a denim jacket and boots, guitar in hand. He didn't need to introduce himself, but he did anyway. "Folks," he said, his voice low and clear, "tonight's about one person, Miss Martha Louise Green. She's the reason I'm here, literally, and I figure the best way I can say thank you is the way I know best, through music." He started with her favorite hymn, "Peace in the Valley." Her eyes closed as he sang it slow, like a prayer, like it was just for her. Then he paused and looked straight at her. "Martha, this next song, I wrote it for you. It's called The Waiting Hands, because that's what you gave me when no one else could. Time, a second chance, a first breath." And as he strummed the first notes, something shifted in the air. The field grew still, the stars leaned closer, and Martha, who had spent a lifetime giving life to others, sat with tears running down her cheeks as Elvis sang her story. By the final verse, the whole crowd was in tears. "Now these hands play the songs the world sings along, but they once held mine when my breath was all gone. So if you ever wonder where the music began, it started right there, in the waiting hands." When the last chord faded, Elvis set the guitar down and stepped off the stage. He didn't bow. He didn't smile for the camera. He walked straight to Martha and hugged her tight, like a grandson who had finally come home. She whispered something into his ear, and he nodded, wiping his eyes. Later that night, as the crew packed up and the neighbors trickled away, Elvis sat beside her on the porch again. The concert was over, but he stayed. They talked about her garden, her chickens, her favorite gospel station on the radio. No spotlights, no spectacle, just two people with a story that only they truly understood. The next morning, Elvis quietly made arrangements for her. A new home, still on her land, but easier to get around in. A trust to cover her needs for the rest of her life. Medical bill, groceries, anything she wanted. And a fund in her name to train midwives and nurses across the South, especially in underserved towns like the one where she worked her whole life. When someone asked him why he'd gone through all that effort, Elvis just smiled. "She waited on my breath," he said. "Now I'm returning the favor." Martha never asked for anything, not during the hardest deliveries, not when families couldn't pay, not even after Elvis changed her life. And yet, her story, once quiet and hidden, began to ripple out like sunlight on water. Word of the backyard concert made its way through local papers. Then a regional TV station caught wind. But Elvis, true to his word, refused every interview. "This was between me and Miss Martha," he told a friend, "not the headlines." Still, people wanted to know who she was. Not because she'd met Elvis Presley, but because she helped create him. And once people knew the full story, how she refused to let a newborn slip away, how she gave one last push of hope when no one else would. They started writing letters. Nurses from across the country, mothers who had nearly lost their own babies, students studying midwifery who had never heard her name but now spoke it with reverence. A year after the concert, Elvis formally launched the Martha Louise Green Foundation, focused on maternal care in rural communities. Scholarships, clinics, training programs. Her name, once tucked away in a dusty corner of history, was now etched into the future of healthcare. And Martha, she didn't change a bit. She stayed in her small home, tended her lavender, attended every local church service. But she did start visiting nursing schools at Elvis's request. Not as a celebrity, not even as a teacher, just as someone who'd been there, who'd made the hard calls in the quiet hours, who had waited when others gave up. She would always say the same thing: you might not remember every baby you help, but one of them might grow up to change the world, so treat them all like they will. Elvis visited often, sometimes to talk, sometimes just to sit on the porch in silence. He said it grounded him, reminded him who he really was. Not the icon, but the boy who barely made it. They became family in a way neither of them expected, and when Elvis passed in 1977, one of the last phone calls he made was to Martha. He told her he loved her, thanked her, said he was still trying to live up to the life she fought to save. She was at his funeral, quiet, tearful, holding the same photo he once gave her, the two of them on her porch, her hand over his. She lived 5 more years after that, always steady, always kind. When she passed in 1982, hundreds showed up. Students, nurses, neighbors, and a few faces from Graceland. The photo of her and Elvis sat by her casket. And every year since, the Martha Louise Green Award is given to a nurse or midwife who embodies her spirit. Someone who stays when it's hard. Someone who believes when it seems impossible. Today, her story is part of medical textbooks. Her name is spoken in lectures. And in the lobby of the Foundation's headquarters stands a sculpture. 2 hands, open and strong. The plaque reads, "To the woman who gave Elvis Presley his first breath and gave the world a chance to hear his voice." Because heroes don't always wear uniforms or hold microphones. Sometimes they hold life, and they wait.